Why am I doing this? The live-action Disney remakes. For a time, I thought these remakes were absolutely hated and not a single person liked them in any regard. However, as the past few years have gone on, I've seen a few people say kind things about these remakes. Hell, even some of my friends and family said they're pretty good and maybe I was overhating. So I thought to myself, maybe these got better as time went on, maybe a few of these are actual gems. And while I will admit a few of these caught me off guard with their quality, man, the majority of these were just truly awful. Part of the reason why this video took so long to get out was just how hard it was for me to sit through all these movies. Also, I was waiting for Snow White to come out, so you're welcome, I guess. This wasn't worth it. So, I'm genuinely sorry to the people who actually like some of these remakes, but overall, these represent something truly disgusting about the film industry. These remakes are basically implying that animation is inherently worse than live action, and that an animated film, no matter how excellent it is, can be improved upon by simply remaking it into live action. And guys, I won't lie, just writing that out for my script really ticked me off. The worst part about that is that this is coming from Disney, the company that made some of the most beloved and iconic animated films ever made. I feel as if 99% of the people who genuinely think that animation is only for children and no animated film has anything an adult can enjoy has only seen a few Disney or Illumination movies and already went into those with a chip on their shoulder. Like, yeah, you're right, all of these movies are only made for children and an adult can get nothing out of them. Like, come the fuck on, animation is not a genre made only for children. It's its own visual medium that can tackle any genre with more creativity and powerful visuals than any live-action movie can. I know that's a hot take, but I'm just putting it out there. I just need people to understand that these live-action remakes are borderline disgusting in concept alone. That being said, there are a few of these that I feel deserve to exist due to the improvements they made on the original. Hell, one of these is undoubtedly better than the original counterpart. But yeah, even those few good ones weren't really good enough to save the rest of this list. But enough intro, let's actually get into it. Before we start though, I'll be going through these from best to worst, since I feel like a lot of people agree on what some of the best of these films are. Also, I'm only ranking movies that are a direct and intentional remake of an animated movie produced by Walt Disney Animation Studios. I won't be doing any movies that are broader reimaginings, reboots, or remakes of live-action films. So this list will not include any of these movies. With that all out of the way, let's dive right in with my number one pick. Yeah, I don't think this comes as a surprise to anyone, but Cinderella 2015 is by far the best movie to come out of this trend. And I think part of that is because I don't really like the original Cinderella all that much. So this movie really had nowhere to go but up. Like seriously, this is the only movie out of these 12 on the list that improves upon the original counterpart in almost every area. I mean, I haven't seen Snow White yet as of recording this, but I'm assuming it's not going to be great, but whatever. So yes, the original Cinderella is iconic and every meaning of the word classic, but it's honestly really dated and isn't even a very good adaptation of the Cinderella story. So much of this movie is centered around the mice and not Cinderella herself, so it makes her come across as a really bland and flat character. Even though she's the main point of the movie! Like seriously, I get why they had to pad the runtime. Fairy tales are pretty simple stories, so you gotta do what you gotta do to stretch it to feature length. But this movie chose boring, unfunny antics about mice. Mice! But this movie chose to develop Cinderella, the prince, and the stepmother into actual characters with actual depth. Cinderella here has a lot more going on. The movie opens up with her and her birth parents bonding. It's really simple but really sweet. It adds an emotional punch to the film when her mom dies and when her dad remarries. And then dies. My favorite part about this movie though is the parallel between Lady Tremaine and Ella herself. Tremaine doesn't start off as some totally evil villain. Yeah, she's kind of a cold bitch, but she still has some kindness in her heart. The movie made it very clear that Tremaine loved Ella's father in a certain way. However, she was jealous between the connection between the two of them. However, it's when Ella's dad dies is when these two become very different, because Tremaine lets her grief consume her and she becomes even more cold, bitter, and resentful towards Ella. But meanwhile, Ella perseveres through her loss and sadness and does everything in her power to follow her mother's teaching of to have courage and be kind to others. These two represent opposite sides of the coin of grief, and I just love the dynamic, especially when it comes to a head at the end, when Ella finally calls out Tremaine over her bullshit and asks why she does all this, and Tremaine can't even come up with a valid reason as to why. She's just a bitter, spiteful, and resentful person. Meanwhile, Ella is as pure-hearted as they come, What makes her compelling isn't that she's just kind and sweet, but even at her darkest, lowest moments, she still finds the courage and strength to persevere and put others before herself. When she finds out that her father died, the first thing she does is express her condolences to his friend who had to break the news. When she has an emotional breakdown and runs away, she saves the stag from the royal hunting party. When she's given practically nothing to eat, she still shares with all of her mice friends. When she leaves the ball and heard the prince will marry another princess, she's just happy that she had a fun time. And the prince is actually a character here. He honestly might be my second favorite character in the film besides Ella herself. This guy actually lives up to the namesake of Prince Charming. Kit is legitimately charming and serves as a great parallel to Ella. They're both kind, but they're also unhappy with what their parental figures are subjecting them to, but they come from opposite ends of the class system, but that doesn't stop the genuine connection they form here. The prince is plain fun. He comes across a lot more like how he did in the direct-to-DVD Cinderella sequels that everyone on Twitter say are really good.
I forbid you to take another step down these stairs!
Okay.
He's funny, and he bounces off the king really well. He and the king get enough scenes together to make the king's death really heartbreaking, especially with his arc of coming full circle and allowing Kit to marry who he pleases. Actually, wait, how could I forget Helena Bonham Carter as the fairy godmother? Wow, what a casting choice. She's a lot more ditzy and zany here than she was in the original, and I feel like it works. I think because this film is a lot more grounded than the original, having a more over-the-top fairy godmother highlights her magic qualities and adds an extra layer of hope and happiness to the film after such an emotionally charged scene. Yeah, I do really wish they kept her song or wrote her a new one, but I still think this is a great adaptation of a classic, iconic character. But where this film truly excels is in the visuals. The colors are very prominent for the mood of the scenes. It can be a bit too bright and oversaturated at times, but that's just a nitpick. The CGI holds up decently, I guess, but it's really the art design and direction for some of these sequences that truly sell the visuals for me. Ella receiving her dress felt like true Disney magic. It got me all giddy and awestruck, which I haven't felt for a long time while watching a Disney movie. One more thing I want to highlight is the romance between Ella and the prince here. Sure, they're both well written individually, but this movie goes the extra mile by not only giving them more screen time individually, but also together. Here, they meet 30 minutes into the movie, rather than when there's only 30 minutes left. Their first scene together does a really good job portraying their main character traits and how they bounce off and relate to each other. Kit is tired of being a prince and just wants to be looked at as his own person, so he dances around the truth when introducing himself to Ella. Ella is concerned about the stag and doesn't want the hunting party to kill him, but she still shows understanding and kindness towards Kit. And when Kit asks if she's being treated well at home, she downplays her experiences. Mind you, this is coming off the heels of Ella's emotional breakdown, so this proves that even in her darkest moments, she still holds no ill will towards her stepfamily. I think this beautifully demonstrates what a character meeting scene should be. This movie also makes it where the prince is the one to put the slipper on Ella at the end, instead of just some random palace guy with no connection to Ella at all. This adds an extra layer of oomph to the scene. And if we're talking about emotional oomph, that slipper scene at the party was some true romance right there. I felt my heart flutter a little bit during that part, and I'm not the kind of guy who particularly loves romance. So is this movie perfect? Well... Like I said earlier, the lack of a song for the fairy godmother, and the lack of songs in general, does feel a bit out of place. I really do wish they put in at least one musical number in here. And the script overall soars in some scenes, but in others feels a little awkward and clunky. And none of the characters outside of Ella, the prince, and Lady Tremaine are really that exceptional. I mean, they serve their purposes, but they're nothing special. But other than that, I don't have any major problems with this movie. Sure, it's not perfect. Hell, it's not even the best Cinderella adaptation. But in comparison to the original, it's night and day. In my opinion, this is the only one of these remakes that not only is good, but is actually better than its original counterpart. Wait, hear me out. Sure, the original is a classic, but can you really say that Cinderella and Prince Charming are overly developed in that one? Is this really one of the best Disney romances? This remake takes a relatively weak film and buffs it up. This is what these remakes should set out to do. It's a solid film, please check it out guys. Hey Disney, give us more remakes like this one. However, it can only go down from here.
Look at this. Aladdin 4. Jafar may need glasses.
Yeah, I'm surprised too. I remember a lot of people saying this one was actually really good when it came out. I saw it in theaters and I didn't really think much of it, but after watching it again almost 6 years later, I can say I actually enjoyed myself. But it's not perfect, so I'll get what I don't like out of the way first. First off, there seems to be a bit less spectacle in some sequences. Like, the opening starts off really strong, but then it just kinda cuts to the Cave of Wonders. Like, look at the original. We see a mysterious, evil-looking guy meeting a shady murderer in the desert in the middle of the night, and they race after a glowing scarab that opens a giant cave in the shape of a lion's head in the desert. This is atmospheric, mysterious, and just plain awesome. But in the remake, the camera just kind of pans to them already at the cave, which is considerably less interesting to look at in this version, but whatever. I don't want these remakes to be an exact copy of the original, shot for shot, but if you're going to change something, at least make it better. Up the awe, up the spectacle. The same kinda goes for One Jump Ahead. In this version, the songs are intro to Jasmine, so it's just us and Aladdin running around with this girl we don't know. And her being a princess isn't really a big enough of a reveal to really justify this. It just kinda makes her intro to Aladdin feel less compelling since we don't really know her or her motivations yet. Like in the original, even though they barely know each other, I really buy their sudden connection because we've seen these two in their own story arcs and I can tell that they're a good match. Again, it shouldn't be the same, but it should be better. Another gripe I have is some of the visuals. This movie has fantastic sets and costumes. It's gorgeous during the day and during some of the night scenes, but some of the other night scenes are really flat and look super artificial. In some of these night scenes, it's just blue as far as the eye can see. This was especially noticeable and disappointing during the Whole New World segment. This is one of Disney's most gorgeous songs, but it was paired with a really flat color scheme, and I can't help but feel like the entire scene looks like bad green screen. And yeah, the CGI is pretty terrible in some shots, but I'm not going to go too deep into that because the internet trashed this movie CGI when it came out. So yeah, I got all my problems out of the way, and there's nothing else egregiously wrong with this movie that I forgot to—
God fucking damn it!
Guys, this might be one of the most disappointing downgrades for any of these characters. For any of these characters so far. How would you describe Jafar in the original? I would say intimidating, smooth, smug, conniving, dignified, evil. He gets even better once he gets the genie and goes full batshit. But in this movie, he's just a normal guy who's evil because he wears black, I guess? Like seriously, I'm sure Marwan Kenzari is a fine actor, and he does okay with what he's given in this movie, but he was not the pick for this role. I need to stress, I don't blame the acting, it's not his fault, I think this is more of a directing and writing thing. He just doesn't have the stage presence, the physique, the demeanor, or the voice to pull off Jafar. Again, Jafar doesn't have to be identical to how he was in the original, but this is such a huge step down that it genuinely hurts. This looks like a villain. This looks like a guy working a 9 to 5 who has some complaints about mid-level management. Okay, is there anything else wrong with this movie? Well, not really. I really like just about everything else. I cannot stress enough how much better this film got on rewatch. What clicked with me a lot more this time were the performances. I really got behind Mina Masood as Aladdin this time around. He really matched the original Aladdin's natural charm and charisma. He's a criminal, but a lovable one. It's a really risky decision that this movie executes flawlessly. Naomi Scott was also a really nice revision of Jasmine, though I will say she was a little bit less entertaining than she was in the original, but this is made up for with a whole new plot point and motivation for her character, that being Jasmine wanting to rule the kingdom on her own and not be married off to a prince that doesn't know or understand her home. I find this a lot more compelling and unique than her motivation of not wanting to be married off in the original because she wants to marry for true love and not political gain. It's a good plot point for sure, but it's something Disney used a lot at this time. So I really appreciate this version of Jasmine's motivation tying closer to her people and their well-being, much like another Disney princess who I adore. Though she still has spunk, she isn't quite as fun to watch as Jasmine in the original, but that's just a nitpick. I still really enjoyed her here. And I'm surprised to say, but Will Smith kinda killed it as the genie. I know this casting choice was controversial when it came out, but this movie clearly was not trying to imitate the late Robin Williams' legendary performance. This version of the genie is absolutely meant to stand out on his own. This genie isn't as fast or zippy and constantly making real-life pop culture references. Instead, he's cool and collected, and they play into his motivation of wanting to be free much more by establishing a really cute romance between him and Jasmine's palace worker friend. Luckily, this side romance is given enough time and needs to feel genuine and sweet. And surprisingly, despite being an entire half hour longer than the original, this movie doesn't feel overly long or bloated. It moves along at a decent pace, so you're never waiting for it to wrap up. And yeah, I need to acknowledge the music. This soundtrack is fire, an absolute banger reimagining of some of the original song, while adding the original song Speechless, which goes so hard. It perfectly played into Jasmine's character arc and felt totally earned. Probably my favorite track in the entire film. It was just epic. And yeah, I see why Prince Ali is so popular. This is a faithful, yet interestingly original rendition. I guess what I'm trying to say, guys, is that I really liked the Aladdin remake. It's not perfect, and it's definitely inferior to the original. It does some new things I really like, but also does a few things that kinda get on my nerves, so in the end, it balances out to a pretty fun experience. Overall, I liked it, just not all of it. Okay, this may be a hot take, so prepare yourselves. A lot of times when I see people discussing these remakes online, they seem to say that Jungle Book was actually really good, possibly one of the best of the bunch. And while I will say this is one of the better ones, it's not perfect and I can't really bring myself to say it's anything better than pretty good.
Did he just say, aye, he did?
I guess we should start off with what I don't like. First off, I guess my biggest issue with this one is the lack of charm. I can't bring myself to say that the original Jungle Book is a perfect, deep narrative masterpiece. It's more of a chill, meandering slice-of-life movie with a vague, overarching story. What really makes the original so memorable is the lovable characters. Mowgli's kinda whatever, but Bagheera's frustrated sarcasm is hilarious, Baloo is fun and charming, and King Louie is one of the most baller characters in fiction. And Shere Khan is a cool, collected, almost Victorian villain, who had a nice screen presence and made an impact with very little screen time. Everyone in this remake feels mostly the same, but a lot less charming and memorable. None of the characters are bad, they're just a lot less fun. And while I do understand this movie was supposed to be darker and grittier, that doesn't mean these characters have to be less entertaining. Baloo and Mowgli's relationship kinda feels less genuine since it's built off debt instead of bonding and kindness. Sure, it kinda blossoms into them becoming genuine friends, but I just don't buy it as much. I guess it comes down to Baloo being more likable and charming in the original. But that's not a knock against Bill Murray, because he had some really funny lines and deliveries.
It's a man cub.
A man cub?
Yeah, it's a man cub.
It's not a monkey.
No, it's not. It's a man cub.
You have never been a more endangered species than you are at this moment.
You're doing an amazing job.
Bagheera kinda went from a sarcastic stick in the mud to just a stoic cat who cares about Mowgli. Yeah, he's written differently and trying to train Mowgli more than just protect him, but he really doesn't have any character traits outside of this. Him telling Mowgli about the elephants was kinda cool, but that doesn't change his personality or motivations. It's more of just him teaching Mowgli about the jungle. And I need to stress, I don't dislike Bagheera in this. In a vacuum, he's perfectly serviceable. I just like him less than his original counterpart, which is not what these remakes should be doing. And all the wolves are fine, but aren't really interesting or noteworthy. They just love Mowgli and want to protect him as well as the pack. I really don't have much to say.
I thought I made myself clear. I wanted him turned over to me.
We no longer harbor him. He has left the pack.
Yo, what the? Shere Khan is also a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, I really like that he has more screen time and he's established as a threat by showing us and not telling us, which is a big win in my book. I believe one of the most important rules in visual media is show, don't tell. That being said, he kinda has the same problem as the other characters. He's less charming and interesting and more generic. He really feels like a contemporary Hollywood villain instead of a smooth, charming, egotistical Victorian villain in the original. He's intimidating, sure, but he just doesn't have that old school villain presence, and because of that, he's just kind of forgettable. But he did have this one really cool scene where he threatens the wolf pups. That shit was legitimately spine-chilling. And King Louie... King Louie was actually pretty cool. The whole mafia thing really worked in this adaptation, and Christopher Walken brings the heat to this role.
It doesn't work for me. I gotta have more cowbell.
And I'm not gonna knock the child acting that much. It's not great, but I can tell this kid's actually trying, so I won't harp on him. But other than these less charming characters, is this movie bad? Well... The film is paced decently, but the story is never really engaging enough to really keep you invested. It's not a bad story, it's just not all that groundbreaking, and the attempts to add more to make it deeper just kinda fell flat for me. Now the visuals... There are some sequences in this movie that are legitimately excellent and look fantastic visually, especially the bare necessity sequence in the river. That shit looked photoreal. But there are some shots that really stick out and look like it's just a kid on a blue set, specifically the cost scene. That was distracting. One thing I actually really liked about this one, however, was the tone. This film was completely tonally distinct from the original. Though it hits a lot of the same story beats, I feel completely different watching these two movies. So I applaud this movie for that, because too many of these remakes are so tonally similar that I just wish I could be watching the original instead. Overall, I guess this movie's kind of a mixed bag, but it doesn't really feel right saying that because all the negative aspects aren't things I dislike, they're just things I don't really love. It's just kind of a meh experience for me, but I still had a decent time watching it, and I may find myself rewatching it every now and then. So yeah, it's not bad. I can easily understand why people think this is one of the best, and I won't argue with you if you say this is the best. It wasn't anything I adored, but there wasn't anything I actually disliked. Okay, this one's kind of a mixed bag. This time, I'll start out with the positives. The costumes and set designs were all great. Yeah, there were some kind of ugly CGI sequences, but when it was a real set, it looked fantastic. And I really dug the costumes here. This movie honestly had my favorite wardrobe out of all these remakes. The acting and voice acting were great too. Though I wasn't a huge fan of a lot of the writing and directing choices for this one, everyone did a very nice job performing in this movie. The only one that I really wasn't sold on was Emma Watson as Belle. Don't get me wrong, she's perfectly serviceable, but man, does she lack the energy and genuine spark of the original. It's a shame because I really love the character. I just don't think that Watson was the right pick for this role. But everyone else did fantastic, especially Luke Evans, Kevin Kline, and Josh Gad. They were the only ones that really got me invested in the film. Speaking of Kevin Kline, I really like this interpretation of the character Maurice. I honestly find him a lot more interesting and compelling in this one compared to the original, which is probably the only thing this one does better than the original. Making him more grounded and emotionally driven in this one, instead of comedically driven, was the change the character needed to be sent over the top for me. But as for the rest of the movie, my first gripe is the look of the furniture characters. A lot of people like to rag on Lion King 2019 by saying that the lions were all too realistic and not expressive enough, but I think that bad trend started with this movie. All the castle characters are so rigid and trying so hard to look real that we kind of forget that these guys are magical people living as objects. Like, guys, they don't have to look realistic. They're not realistic at all. This is a talking candle, for God's sake. Are we trying to conform him to realistic physics? It's a darn shame too, because man, every single one of these characters had excellent voice acting. Those guys brought their A game, especially Ewan McGregor and Sir Ian McKellen. I mean, I guess they don't look awful, but it's a definite step down from the original. And if we're talking about step downs from the original, I'm not the biggest fan of Beast here, or really his whole relationship with Belle. So I know a lot of people like to rag on the original for its case of supposed Stockholm Syndrome, but let's clear the air right now. That movie had no ounce of Stockholm Syndrome at all. It was clear from the very beginning that Belle wasn't an actual prisoner, and that it was more of a title than anything. From the moment she got there, the Beast showed her to her nicer room to make sure she was comfortable. He seemed genuinely sorry for her situation, and kind of nervous about it. He even tells her that she's free to walk wherever she wants in the castle except this one wing. Yeah, he doesn't let her eat, but that seems more like a fit of rage than it did an actual command. The only reason why she leaves the castle because she got scared when he yelled at her. But to be fair, I think he had every right to do so because she was about to touch the rose, which could have been disastrous for both him and everyone who works in the castle. She then runs away successfully, but he comes back to save her out of the goodness of his heart, and she does the same for him. So yeah, this whole prisoner thing wasn't being taken seriously. But Beast in this one is a straight up psycho! He keeps her locked up in the cell, is much more aggressive and abrasive about the whole dinner situation, and when Belle tries to escape, all the furniture make an active attempt to keep her from leaving the castle. This feels more like she's an actual prisoner, and I don't really buy the whole kindly relationship between her and the Beast here. Like, come on guys, stop ragging on the near perfect original story and trying to claim that it has Stockholm Syndrome. Look at this movie. If you want to make a case of Stockholm Syndrome, this one is much easier to do so. And man, I just don't buy the chemistry between these two. I'm just not really a huge fan of the Beast CGI here or his overall presence. It's just borderline uncanny, and I don't really buy his characterization. He's way more flat and broody, he doesn't have nearly as much of a personality or charisma like in the original, and like I said earlier, Emma Watson kinda falls flat too. She's a great actress, I just don't think she was the right pick for this specific role. And okay, let's get the elephant out of the room here. The music is a huge letdown. What made the original so great is the fact that they were trying to emulate musical theater. The vocals all sounded genuine, a little messy. There were tiny hiccups and imperfections, but in a way that added personality and life to the songs, not errors. But here, all the vocals are polished and auto-tuned into oblivion to the point where it almost sounds like pop. I know it's still musical theater style music, but when you take away all the live performance-esque qualities, it just sounds too polished to sound genuine. And Emma Watson got it worse here. I know she's a fine singer, but she is so auto-tuned and perfected here that she sounds lifeless, like she's trying to record a pop album. Also, I can't play the music for you because of copyright reasons, but please, on your own time, I would like you to go look at these two scenes together and tell me which one has more life and energy put into it. I can understand why non-musical theater fans praise this movie's music, but for anyone who is a fan of theater, or classic Disney movies in general, I think it's night and day which soundtrack is better. That being said, Luke Evans and Josh Gad were both allowed to sing their hearts out with practically no editing at all, so they sound great. They were definitely highlights of the film. Honestly, I think these two were also just the best part of the movie. I mean, these two have great chemistry. They're so hilarious together, so many funny moments, and even though I think Gaston was better written in the original, I think his chemistry with LeFou is way better in this one.
And she's the only girl that gives me that sense of...
Je ne sais quoi? I don't know what that means.
editing is fine for the most part, except for the wolf chase sequence with Maurice. That was so oddly choppy and rough that it was kind of hard to tell what was going on. It really stuck out. Okay, I know I'm gonna get eviscerated for this one, but I also feel by emphasizing Belle's feminist qualities from the original, it just kind of detracts from their strengths. It feels more in your face and therefore loses nuance, subtlety, almost as if the film wasn't confident that little girls would be able to pick up that Belle is a strong, independent woman. Like this scene right here.
What on earth are you doing? Teaching another girl to read? Isn't one enough?
This was so over the top and on the nose that it kind of felt like a parody. One more thing, the pacing of the original is near perfect, to the point where you're never bored, but this one was kind of a slog to get through. I was ready for it to be over when there were still 20 minutes left, which isn't what you want to do with these remakes. The Aladdin remake felt perfectly paced, I wasn't bored at all, but this one really tried my patience. There were so many scenes that I feel like didn't add anything. Specifically the Days in the Sun song. Like bro, no joke, when it cut to the kid Beast staring at his dead mom with no emotion on his face singing to her, I actually laughed out loud. That was the biggest laugh the movie got out of me that wasn't from Gaston or LeFou. This movie isn't the worst thing ever, it's just kind of, I mean, it's still based off a great story, but the first one is just so perfect that it's really hard to follow up on it. There's really not much more you can improve upon. So it's fine, I guess. I mean, it's not really worth checking out unless you're bored or unless you really have nothing morally against these remakes. I'm giving it a higher rating than I thought at first because objectively it isn't that bad. It just, I don't know, it kind of got to me more than some of the others. But I'll still give it a 6 out of 10. Okay, just warning you guys, since this movie just came out, there will be a spoiler warning for Snow White. I'll be giving full spoilers. I doubt many of you care though, but whatever. Anyways, 3, 2, 1, Snow. So before I get into the movie itself, before I say anything about how I felt about the movie, I'm gonna say this. Making a live-action remake based off the first feature-length animated film of all time is one of the most disrespectful things I've ever heard of. And I'm fully aware that Disney did not invent the Snow White story. I'm fully aware that it is a very common fairy tale that has had lots of film adaptations not even from Disney. But this is a direct remake of the Disney one, which again was the first feature-length animated film of all time. Doing this, no matter how good the movie turned out, is extremely disrespectful. Okay, just warning all of you now, I literally just got home from the theater. And I'm trying to word vomit this one, so my thoughts are still fresh in my head, because I can't really go back and rewatch anything, because, you know, it's in the theaters right now. So, just warning you ahead of time. And I'm not sure if you're all ready to hear this, but I actually didn't hate Snow White. Now, I know the controversy around this one is really juicy, and it's kind of why I wanted to make this video, but at the same time, just because it was controversial because of something the actors said, that doesn't mean the movie was gonna be terrible. It's not great, but there was some decent stuff in here. Well, let's go over it. First off, the music was very hit or miss. The hits hit really hard, but the misses were kind of terrible. The opening, where the good things grow, was actually really solid. I don't know, I liked the vocals, the choreography is kind of bad, but the vocals were great. It was fun, had great instrumentals. It was just a solid opening. I really enjoyed it. Though I will say, some of the lyrics and some of the script in the opening scene especially, the whole movie, but especially the opening 10 minutes, was so in your face. Like when they're talking about the evil queen for the first time, saying how she deceived her way into the kingdom, but then it said, but she was evil. That actually made me laugh out loud because it was so over the top, so on the nose. Like, come on, have some nuance, please. And if we're talking about Gal Gadot, man, she is the most talented piece of cardboard I've ever seen. I know y'all are expecting Rachel Zegler to have a terrible performance, but she actually did good. Gal Gadot is a performance you want to make fun of, because holy crap, unsurprisingly, she was flat. Really flat. All the memes you've seen online about her line deliveries were right. I mean, some of them made me laugh out loud. Especially at the end, like in the trailer, when she says, I said enough. That actually made me laugh in the theater. Oh my god, it was great.
Enough.
Grumpiest, sleepiest.
I said enough.
Going back to Zegler now, I actually really liked her performance. I will say, no matter how annoying she is, no matter all the dumb stuff she says outside of the movie, that does not mean she's a bad actress or a bad singer. Because man, this girl had some pipes. She had a beautiful singing voice, and I really enjoyed it in the movie. Except she was a little samey during her songs. Like, even during the more lighthearted songs, she was still singing as if it was a big, powerful drama. Like, her I Want song, Waiting on a Wish, that was actually really strong. But then when she did Whistle While You Work, it felt like she was coming on too strong. It kind of took me out of the movie a little bit. I can't exactly blame Zegler or Gal Gadot for some of the awkward line deliveries too much, because oh my god, this script is so stilted and awkward in places. Like, Jesus Christ, it is so on the nose, so tell, don't show, which is not what you want to do. You want to show, don't tell. Like, I honestly, as much as I do blame Godot's acting, I can't blame it all on her because some of these lines are so first grade. Like, it almost feels like a parody at times. And even though I liked Hi Ho and Waiting on a Wish, the villain song, I don't even know the name, but Gal Gadot's villain song might be a contender for the worst villain song in a while. Like, it's not quite This Is the Things I Get levels of bad, but it's not good. It could not pick a consistent melody, could not pick a consistent tune. I can't sing or hum any of it because it was so scattershot and not in a good, fun way. I mean, Godot's singing was fine, if that even was her. And the choreography was whatever, I guess. I liked how she wore the original costume, but yeah, it was kind of laughably bad. New contender for the worst villain song. And the romance song was kind of bad too. Oh yeah, we should probably talk about the romance. Not great. I just got home from the theater. I almost forgot that he was in the movie. He wasn't a prince in this one. He was like a thief, bandit, rebel, which was kind of cool, I guess. But these two had no chemistry. Zegler and whatever his face were just acting at each other. I did not buy the romance, and the romance was so poorly paced that it kind of made me mad. It's like they meet a little bit at the beginning when he's stealing stuff and she sets him free. Then they see each other later on and he sings a song saying, "You're a spoiled brat, huh?" He then all of a sudden risks his life to save her. And then after he wakes up, they sing a song about how much they're in love with each other. Like, dude, if the chemistry was a little better, I might be able to buy this romance, but no. Low-key, this might be the weakest romance in any of these live-action remakes. I'm not kidding. It was bad. The romance song wasn't great either. Like, again, the songs are hit or miss. This was one of the misses. Another thing the movie doesn't do great is just the pacing. Like, the original Snow White movie doesn't have much of a plot. It's mostly a slice-of-life meandering movie, and it feels really long because of that. So in this one, they try to add more of a story, which actually kind of worked for the most part. Those parts of the movie were great, but when we kind of slipped back into the old formula of just dicking around with the dwarves, it felt really slow. It just stops and goes, stops and goes, stops and goes, stops and goes, and it makes it kind of hard to get invested because you're getting bored, then you're getting into it, then you get bored again. It made the movie feel a lot longer than it actually was. Something I liked, though, was the camera work. This is directed by Mark Webb, who, if you don't know, did the Amazing Spider-Man movies. Say what you will about those movies, but the directing in them was excellent. Like, holy god, some of this camera work was actually really good. Like, it kind of saved parts of the movie for me. In addition to that, the colors and sets were great too. Like, visually, this might be one of the best of the live-action remakes so far. Maybe the best in general. I can understand why it might be too color vomity for some people, but I really enjoyed it. I loved the visuals of this movie. Except for one thing. Oh my god! Look, the dwarves in this movie were a lose-lose scenario. If you hired actual little people, then you have a bunch of little people living in a cottage singing songs and being silly. If you hired non-little people and kind of directed them like the dwarves from Lord of the Rings, then you're taking away roles from little people. Or if you have CGI dwarves like this, they look really ugly and take you out of the movie. So no matter what, they were going to lose in this scenario. But man, this loss hit hard because holy shit, these guys look so uncanny. Oh, it was just awful. That being said, I didn't hate the dwarves though. I hate how they looked, and since they were in so much of the movie, it kind of knocked down half a number grade for me. But I thought their directing and slapstick and voice acting was actually pretty good. They got me a little emotionally invested, and I got some genuine belly laughs. Like, there's a scene where they get into a big food fight. There was some really good and well-directed slapstick in there that got a genuine belly laugh out of me. Like, there's a scene where Jonathan gets hit by an arrow, then they take him to Doc to try and save him, and then after a while, Doc comes out and he says, "Well, I was doing all this stuff to him, but..." And then he looks really sad and trails off, right? And then Jonathan walks out just fine. And then Doc says, "I thought he was dead." Oh my god, that had me laughing so hard. Like, that was one of the funniest jokes in any of these remakes. That was hysterical. The climax was a little dumb, though. She gathers the townspeople to try and stand up against the queen, and then she gets the soldiers on her side by saying how she remembers who they were before they became the evil soldiers. And then, like, the queen tries to kill Snow White, but then someone shoots her hand to stop her. And then she's like, "No, I give up." She cries and runs away. And then she dies by breaking the mirror, but I'm like, you did not try very hard. Like, this does not make it come across as intimidating. If you put up a little more of a fight, tried a little harder to kill Snow White, maybe I could have taken you seriously as a villain. But because of this, she kind of came across as a joke. Like, she was too easy to beat. It just kind of killed any tension and made the climax feel really flat and weird to me. Like, it's just them standing on this bridge talking, and then she screams and runs away, and then she dies in the mirror. Like, what the fuck? It wasn't for me. Like, I know you're petty and just kind of a blast cannon, but at the same time, you still have these magical powers. At least try to do something. Oh my god. And then the final number, even though the singing was once again great, I loved the song. The choreography was so off in the final number that it really took me out of the movie and made me giggle. Like, this looks like parody stuff. But it wasn't a bad closing at all. I guess what I'm saying is, y'all are not ready for this, but I didn't hate Snow White. I kind of enjoyed myself, though I don't know if I'll watch it again, because there were some things that really dragged it down for me. Like, it's not the worst, it's not terrible, it's got some good stuff, but the bad things kind of bring it down too much for it to be worth it. so it's gonna be somewhere in the middle of the list. And I know you're all thinking, he just talked all that smack about that movie. He still is putting it this high on the list, and to that I say, yeah, I guess so. Because I don't know why. For some reason, no matter how hard I try, I can't bring myself to actually hate or even dislike this movie. Again, it's not amazing, I don't even know if I can call it good, but I liked it enough to put it this high. I don't care what the controversy says, I'm allowed to enjoy it if I want. And you know what? I was able to get something out of it. Guys, I have so frustratingly little to say about the live-action Lady and the Tramp that it's actually hilarious. Like, by 35 minutes into the movie, I barely had a paragraph of notes. There was so little to say that it's kind of frustrating. Like, what can I say? It's just the most generic dog story you can possibly imagine, but it's not even worth getting mad over. One thing I actually liked was the fact that they used real dogs with some CGI mixed in, rather than fully CGI dogs the entire time. The movie got some bonus points for that, and for the most part the CGI blended in okay, but there were a few scenes that looked kind of off-putting. I'm really struggling here. Okay, even though the lack of expression on the dogs' faces in the spaghetti scene got on my nerves, it still couldn't ruin that scene for me, because man, the spaghetti scene in both versions of this movie is so perfect that I may or may not have teared up a little bit this time. I guess this one had a bit more of a story, and a bit more of an overall plot than the original. The original literally felt like a series of vignettes or short films slapped together. This one did a better job trying to make it more cohesive, especially by building up the whole rat subplot and making that the climax of the movie when there was 20 minutes left of the movie, rather than only 10 minutes like in the original. A little nitpick, I guess, the credits were so bland that it literally felt like they ran out of budget. It was just a bunch of default fonts sliding over the final shot of the house as it zoomed out. I mean, I guess I liked when it faded into animation again, but it weirdly happened too late. Like, by that point, I feel like everyone would have turned the movie off. I also really liked that animated segment at the beginning, so, that was cute, I guess. I like seeing 2D. I don't know, like, this movie is so middle of the road that I'm not even sure if I can recommend it or not. Like, this is one of the movies on the list. No, I'm gonna say it. This is the #1 movie on the list that I had the hardest time talking about. I mean, it didn't do anything worse than the worst aspects of, like, Beauty and the Beast, but it really didn't do anything more memorable. And it's also a little hard for me to get emotionally invested in it because I don't really know about the original or care about it that much. Like, I saw it once or twice as a kid. I barely remembered it. 6 out of 10, moving on. Okay, I'm actually going to break one of my personal movie rules for this one. Usually, I hate it when people let one small or minor aspect or character of a movie ruin the entire experience for them. Like, I've had people, friends even, admit that the movie they just watched was really good, but they chose not to like it for one small nitpick, and it really gets on my nerves. I call this the Yelp mindset. Yelp reviewers will find one tiny thing wrong with the restaurant or experience, and they'll give it 1 star because they expect only perfection. It makes me wish for the days where people could just judge things fairly and objectively rather than letting nitpicks get in the way of an experience. That being said, however, I'm going to make an exception for this movie because I would have liked this movie a lot more, and it might even be half or even a full number higher in terms of ranking if it weren't for 2 big things. Little Mermaid got dragged down by 2 minor things in the movie, and yeah, I know I'm weird for that, but at the same time, this is my list, I can do whatever I want. So let's get those 2 big things out of the way. First, Ursula was kinda terrible. I will admit that I'm a little biased because I just don't like Melissa McCarthy. She's just never done it for me in any of her movies. But it's not only the performance, it's just the adaptation of the character itself. Think about this. What made Ursula so evil and fun to watch in the original? It's that, even though she was a wacko, she felt in control of every situation. It looks like she was holding back and subduing her personality just enough to come across as somewhat trustworthy, even though she is clearly insane. You felt like she was the most dangerous person in the room because she held back just enough to seem in control. You could obviously see through her demeanor. It was an amazing dynamic to watch between her and Ariel. It really made her feel formidable and untrustworthy. It made her feel like an actual witch. But in this remake, Melissa McCarthy hams up the role so much and just goes full wacko, and that it makes Ariel feel like even more of an idiot here for trusting her. One of the biggest criticisms of the original is that Ariel was foolish to trust Ursula. But firstly, she's only 16, she's desperate, and a third, like I said earlier, Ursula kept it under wraps just enough to seem somewhat trustworthy. They portrayed this beautifully by having her whisper some of her lyrics in Poor Unfortunate Souls. But in the remake, she is so obviously insane that Ariel comes across as even more a fool for trusting her. Plus, Poor Unfortunate Souls, there's no subtlety, there's no behind-the-scenes scheming, there's no whispering, she's just crazy and likes to flaunt it. which is a huge step down. Now you might be thinking, if he had that much to say about Ursula, that had to be his least favorite part of the movie. And no, you're wrong, because there was one more character who was even worse.
Stop it, please, I beg you!
I try not to blindly hate on Awkwafina anytime she's cast in anything. I get a lot of people find her annoying, but I don't want to hop on that bandwagon because I actually did kind of like her in Ocean's 8 and Shang-Chi. But I'm sorry guys, this was the last straw that broke the camel's back. After this annoying as sin character, I don't know if I can ever be excited to see her in a movie again. I mean, what else can I say? She was just obnoxious. Some people said that Scuttle in the original was obnoxious as well, but his voice wasn't completely grating and irritating, and his jokes were pretty well written and hilarious. Plus, he didn't have an annoying minute-and-a-half long song in lieu of a 20-second dialogue scene. Like, this character was so bad, she brought the movie down half a number grade. It's that bad. Much like several of the other movies on this list, it also suffers from the ugly realistic animal syndrome. And honestly, I don't think there's a single underwater scene that looks good. Except for some of the scenes in Ursula's layers, probably because those scenes had the luxury of being cloaked in darkness, which is an old Hollywood trick to make CGI look better. And I will say, the hair flowing in the water looked very impressive. It kinda reminded me of Sinbad and Pirates of the Caribbean 5. I don't know, it's a niche thing, but I'm just kind of a sucker for hair being animated to look as if it's flowing underwater. And Ariel was fine here. Actually, she was really good here. I really loved Halle Bailey's performance in this movie. I mostly liked her writing as well, so I don't have any gripes about Ariel. She was great. A really nice adaptation of the original character. And Prince Eric was pretty okay too. One thing I really liked was how they added scenes of them bonding together. Like, they show Eric has an obsession with underwater treasures, and Ariel, as we know, has an obsession with land treasures, so the two of them just completely bond over that. It's a really cute parallel, and I really liked how they added that, especially since it wasn't really in the original. I also love how Ariel was the one to kill Ursula in the end, because the main conflict stems between these two. In the original, Eric killing Ursula doesn't have as much weight to it because these two barely have a connection. The conflict is between Ursula and Ariel. She is her villain. But besides these two, I wasn't really thrilled or floored by any of the other characters. And I hate to say it, but Javier Bardem was surprisingly flat in this movie, which was super disappointing because I loved him before, but Dune Part 2 last year solidified him as one of my favorite actors ever.
Listen, I gave...
But I don't know, something about his performance here just didn't do it for me. I might be in the minority, but it wasn't for me. The Queen and the Royal Staff were all fine, I guess, and Flounder seemed to be in the movie less, so that was kinda nice. But the most disappointing downgrade from characters, though, was Sebastian. He super fell flat here, too. All of his line deliveries had no charm, no spark, he just sounded bored the entire time, which is a huge shame because Sebastian was my favorite character in the original movie. I also really couldn't stand some of the music here. Like I said, Poor Unfortunate Souls was tonally off and just kinda strange for me, and also Under the Sea totally missed the mark. The original was so colorful, so vibrant, and just kinda magical. But here, the movie's flat colors really show, and it's just bland, not magical at all the colors look desaturated. And it's also really weird how they kept all the lyrics of the fish playing various instruments the same, but we don't really see any of that, we just see turtles and starfish awkwardly dancing. That felt super strange to me. Like, it would be sacrilege to change the lyrics to this Oscar-winning song, but it isn't sacrilege to change the entire visual presentation and atmosphere of the scene, even if it doesn't match the lyrics. I did like this rendition of Part of Your World though. No notes, really good. I don't know what else to say, it was great. The movie was paced decently, I never felt too bored, I just wasn't floored by a lot. The stuff I liked, I really liked, but the stuff I didn't like, well, you know how I feel. I saved the best for last. The Scuttlebutt is the worst Disney song, period. I'm not kidding. This is worse than Fixer Upper. This is worse than This Is the Thanks I Get. I can't think of another Disney song that irritated me this much. And it was so pointless. It didn't have to be a minute and a half long. Again, it replaced a 20-second scene of only dialogue. It was so long, so pointless. Oh my god, the most grating vocals ever. The only good thing to come out of it is if you go on the official posting on YouTube of the song, go into the comments, they're hilarious. There are a few things I really loved, mainly the lead two actors and performances, and I liked some of the singing, plus I liked some of the additional romance scenes too. But the rest is either kinda or straight up bad. That being said, nothing besides Scuttle was straight up awful. Well, okay, nothing besides Scuttle and Ursula was straight up awful. Okay, some of the visuals are pretty bad, but again, this one isn't as bad as people make it out to be. I kind of enjoyed myself. Okay, now we're starting to get to the stuff that I really don't like. So like, did this one get anything right? The child acting was pretty decent overall, which was impressive considering that this is a mostly child cast. Jude Law's Captain Hook was kinda neat, but the movie tried too hard to make him serious and cool, rather than eccentric and funny like in the original, which kinda stunk because Captain Hook was by far the best part of the original. Him and Smee were absolutely hysterical and kind of underrated. But I didn't mind him here. I get they were going for a different vibe, and I guess it worked in this one. One thing I will say, I was kind of getting invested in the imagery and the setting once the adventure actually started because man, these cliffs in the ocean were beautiful. These forests had some of the most beautiful green I've ever seen. I really thought this is the place I could adventure to. But then I remembered, this is Neverland. This is the magic land of imagination and wonder, supposedly, but it just looks like the cliffs of Scotland. Because they go to so few places and so little happens geographically in this movie, the world feels surprisingly small. Like, I genuinely felt like the entire movie took place in this one bay with this little cliff and forest right next to it, and nowhere else. Like, shouldn't Neverland feel huge and magical? It's just kind of sad because this was so small in scope, and that's not really the point of Neverland. And even though she gave an okay performance, Wendy came across as a little bossy and unlikable in this one. I'm glad she had more of a character than she did in the original, but I couldn't really get invested in her character, especially when she had a hard time taking responsibility for some things, and she didn't really seem to grow out of that by the end of the movie. Like, the movie is adamant that she's an all-perfect girl boss when she does some kind of pretty bad things, but never really gets called out for them. Peter Pan himself is kind of whatever, but Tinkerbell probably had the worst glowdown though. Like, the fact that she was a crazy, murderous diva in the original, but here she's just kind of sassy, it's a little disappointing. And I mean, her being sassy does still work pretty well for the character, and I can understand why Disney didn't want to make her psycho like she was in the original. But come on, Tinkerbell in the original movie was so funny and so petty that it was a joy to watch, but I didn't really mind her here. The only characters I really didn't care much for were the Lost Boys and the two brothers, whose names I already forgot. By the end of the movie, I realized that these two brothers were even more underdeveloped than they were in the original, which is saying something. The only character trait the little one had is that he has a bear, and the older one wears a hat. One thing that I almost liked was the idea that Peter Pan and Captain Hook used to be friends when they were younger, but then Captain Hook grew up and turned evil. But wait, oh silly me, that's not actually what happened. It's not that he turned evil, it's that Peter Pan didn't believe that he believed in their cause anymore because he missed his mom. Seriously, Peter Pan is kind of the villain in this one. He hates Captain Hook because Captain Hook dared to miss his mother. It's weird. And that part really pissed me off because that's not a bad idea on paper. Just having them be former friends turned rivals, it's not a terrible idea and it would expand upon the original very nicely. But no, we had to make Peter Pan this really weird, kind of evil little brat. It's just so confusing. I don't know what to make of it. It was so close yet so very far. It's just so odd because when Captain Hook at the end quote-unquote dies, Peter Pan cries and is all sad and stuff, and it's sort of like we're supposed to feel for him, but at the same time, you are kind of a monster, you little shit. Like, why should I feel bad? But why should I feel bad for Hook either? Because even though you did betray him, even though he did just kind of miss his mom, at the same time, he's still a crazy, evil, murderous pirate who wants to kill kids. Really, I don't love anyone here. I don't agree with either side of the conflict. I mean, as mad as I am over this, I can't be too mad because at the very least, I can say this movie tried to add something new and wasn't just a 100% rehash of the original. At the very least, it attempted to be different. It wasn't good, but at least it tried. But besides that though, I'm kind of struggling on what to say here because this one was kind of empty and charmless, so I'm not really sure what else I can say. Oh no, wait, there was one scene. There was one scene that really stood out. I felt so mundane during most of the film, but then the movie, towards the end, dropped one of the hardest, coolest sea shanties I've heard in my entire life, and it really got me interested. The scene itself wasn't that great, but holy moly, that song was awesome, and I've started listening to it on a regular basis now. But yeah, this is the first one of these so far where I can straight up say I didn't like it and didn't really have a good time with it, except for one or two parts. Okay, Dumbo's a bit of a weird one for me because I don't hate it nearly as much as everyone else says they do. Oh, don't get me wrong, it's bad. Like, it's real bad, but I just don't understand why everyone acts like this movie ate their grandma when I mostly came out of it just bored. Actually, there was one thing that consistently didn't bore me, though. The only time I felt anything while watching this movie is whenever the stupid main character girl was on screen. Oh my god, she was so flat. Like, I'm not expecting an Oscar-winning performance from any child actor because, you know, reasons. But oh my god, she could have at least tried and put in some effort. Like, she had absolutely no emotion on her face for any of the scenes, so it made it really hard to get invested in her relationship with either her dad or Dumbo. I've seen some people say that it's because she's traumatized because of her dad's disfigurement after the war, but the movie did not make that very clear and does not excuse the fact that she's an emotionless void during most of the scenes that she's in. Like, no joke, there's a scene where Dumbo looks like he's going to literally die during one of his performances. Like, he's hanging off the top of this tall thing, and he's about to fall and die, and she's just staring up at him with a blank expression. Like, it actually got on my nerves and made me mad. I don't really blame the girl though, that's more of a directing than an acting thing. It's just, I know people will probably say she had faith in Dumbo and that he could fly, but at the very least show a little bit of fear, show a little bit of worry, because that would have made the scene a lot more emotionally investing. It may have made the fact that this adorable baby elephant might die. And oh yeah, I guess that's a spoiler for my review, but I kinda like the Dumbo design in this movie, so I don't know, sue me I guess. Also the visuals are kinda horrible. Like, the first 10 seconds of the movie already have bad CGI. Like, was this so hard to film a real train track and a green field? Or just make a mock one? Like seriously, this looks like a video game cutscene, and not a very good one at that. I don't know, I can't put my finger on it, but this entire movie has this just unauthentic fake look to it. I really can't tell if it's the CGI, or the green screen, or the weird lighting effect they put on the entire movie. I can't tell, but it just looks very, very artificial. I'm also sad to say that both Michael freaking Keaton and Danny fucking DeVito were in this movie, and they barely made me feel anything. Michael Keaton kind of put on this weird voice that didn't really click with me, and it kind of made him feel more flat than evil, which is a real shame because I love Michael Keaton as a villain. Actually, I love him in general. He's not awful here, but they really could have made him a lot more. They really could have handed up his eccentric personality here. Danny DeVito had a few laughs, I guess. I mean, he was the only time I felt any sort of positive emotion during the film, because, you know, it's kind of hard to mess up Danny DeVito. He's just that epic.
Is that a monkey in your desk?
Just for emergencies.
I also think it's funny that at the end, they destroy the entire amusement park, so it's very likely that people die during this, but the film just plays it as totally happy and triumphant because, you know, they rescued the baby elephant. Like, seriously, this is a huge disaster. That just kind of came out of nowhere, the fact that I guarantee you at least one person died during this, yet the movie doesn't seem to care? Like, that was actually hilarious because of how poorly it played out. But yeah, this one wasn't for me. I don't have much to say. It was mostly boring with some shitty aspects. The only other thing in this movie of note was the fact that the guy who played Michael Keaton's henchman was the same guy who got his wiener chopped off by Homelander and Banshee. No, I will not show footage, you sickos. I'll be honest guys, I didn't even rewatch it for this video. I saw it once in theaters in 2019, and that was it. I'm never watching this movie again. It is so lifeless, so unoriginal, so nothing. It's a 95% shot-for-shot remake of the original. They added a few scenes of Simba adjusting to his life. They added a small rivalry between Nala and Shenzi. But that's about it. They may have added some more stuff, but I really don't care enough to rewatch it to remember. Like, I cannot express how little I don't want to rewatch this movie. Most of the movies on the list I hadn't seen before, so I actually had to watch them. But lucky for this movie, I didn't feel like sitting through it again because my thoughts on it haven't changed in the past 5.5 years. There's no expression on the faces, so I can't get emotionally invested. The voice acting is flat and boring, so I can't get emotionally invested. I've seen this movie before, but better, so I can't get emotionally invested. Timon and Pumbaa had some funny lines, and James Earl Jones is awesome as always. But seriously guys, do you think this movie had even a fraction of the original movie's effort put into it in any regard besides the very impressive CGI? I mean, come on, just compare the Mufasa death scenes, and I defy you to tell me that the remake is better in any way. I'm not even gonna talk about it anymore. Like, seriously, there are plenty of video essays on YouTube of why this movie is so awful. Just watch those instead. I don't want to talk about this shit anymore. 2 out of 10, moving on. Holy shit! Like, I knew it was gonna be bad. I hadn't heard anything positive about this movie once in the past 5 goddamn years. Literally, the only thing I've heard about this movie that was positive is when my dad said he saw it when it first came out and he said, yeah, it was okay. Though to be fair, even I took that statement with a big grain of salt because he's not really a cinephile.
A what-a-phile?
But oh my god, this is a special type of terrible. Like, you have to actually try to make a movie this bad. Let's start off with the one thing everyone talks about when trashing this movie, the fact that Mulan has magical powers. Do you know what made the original Mulan so great? Ow! Mulan earned everything. She earned her status as a true brave warrior. She earned her offer to be the Emperor's advisor. She earned her place in her family. She earned everything. She earned it by risking her life and working her ass off. Like the scene when she runs away from home is just so epic because she doesn't know how to fight. There's a good chance that she thinks she's gonna die when she does this, but Mulan doesn't care as long as it protects her father and her country. And the entire montage of her training, getting better, and eventually overcoming her obstacles and becoming a true warrior was amazing! Especially with the song Make a Man Out of You, which is still one of Disney's best. This is compelling! People can really relate to Mulan here, especially young girls who've been told they can't do something their whole lives. This movie will inspire you. But what's the remake supposed to make me feel? Inspired? Is Mulan a realistic, empathetic, and nuanced character here? The movie literally tells us in the beginning that she was born with magical chi powers and she can do basically anything. The opening is of her doing impossible parkour stuff and makes it very clear that she's practically invulnerable because of this. Does that sound inspiring? Does that sound invigorating? Does that sound relatable? Do you really want to be teaching your children, specifically your daughters, that they can do anything because they're born great and they don't need to work or try to do anything? It's actually disgusting. And everyone trashes the movie for that, but I don't think enough people are talking about that in the movie, later on, she actually does struggle a little bit. At first, I thought this could be a glimmer of hope in this really bad movie. Maybe Mulan isn't as powerful as we thought, but it turns out she was only struggling because she was afraid to reveal who she really was and was afraid to show her true potential of her powers. Like, I can almost see where this message is coming from, but when the movie earlier on made it very clear that you don't have to try to be great, anything they do after that is completely lost on me and absolutely void. This is a special type of horrible. Not to mention that whoever played Mulan cannot act for the life of her, because holy god, she was so flat and boring in this movie. Like, I'm actually gonna apologize to Emma Watson for trashing her performance in Beauty and the Beast, because this is 1,000 times worse. Oh, and how's the rest of the movie, you ask? It's terrible, thanks for asking. Look at the directing in this shot. This is completely unedited by me. This is nauseating. Can you actually watch this and tell me this looks good as an easy to follow action scene? This is worse than the first Gladiator and that one Jason Bourne fight scene. And it actually makes me mad when people try to say that this one is supposed to be darker and grittier when it has scenes like the matchmaker scene and some of these fights and the opening parkour. This looks like a parody movie. You cannot tell me this is darker and grittier than a kid's cartoon movie. How do we find out that the Huns destroyed the village in the original? Well, the characters were singing a happy musical number, but then it suddenly gets cut off and we see the village destroyed and all the people that have been massacred. There's no dialogue for the next several seconds. It's just our characters walking around, seeing the carnage, and absolutely speechless. And it hits hard. It beautifully shows the harsh realities of war. And how do we find out the village was destroyed in this one? Well, even though they talk about destroying villages, we don't actually see any destroyed villages. We just see a company of soldiers that were killed. But you know, it's soldiers in war. Even though it's sad that they're dead, it's to be expected. What made the original scene so heartbreaking was the fact that innocent people were massacred. Here, it just looks like the aftermath of a regular battle. Because God forbid we have innocent people dying in our Disney movie. That's too dark and gritty for this darker and grittier Mulan remake. But they had no problem showing innocent people dying at the beginning of the movie? This is so confusing. I don't even know why I'm getting so upset over it. I'm actually going off script. I don't know why I'm getting so mad over this. It's not even worth being taken seriously. But I will continue to keep going on for your entertainment only. Don't even get me started on the goddamn villain. She says that she's a discriminated woman and she's just taking her anger out on China. Not only is she trying to justify her actions, but the film is trying to portray her as sympathetic. Like, I know, it must really suck being a woman this time. I'm not kidding. It must really suck. It must be scary, segregated, unpleasant, all that stuff. But that does not give you the right to go across China, killing thousands of innocent people. And the movie is actually disgusting for trying to portray her as sympathetic and get us on her side. And I can't believe they pulled the whole "you and I aren't so different, Spider-Man" gimmick between her and Mulan. Give me a fucking break. I don't care that they're both strong women. That does not make them the same at all. Mulan is fighting to protect innocent people. The witch lady's fighting to kill innocent people because she's upset about being a woman, I guess. It also makes her sacrifice at the end feel really unearned and just kinda gross because the movie is trying to portray her as sympathetic even though she's killed a lot of people. It's trying to redeem her. Honestly, I think she's irredeemable. Not every villain has to be redeemed, especially one who kills a lot of innocent people like this witch lady. Because God forbid we have our strong, independent women characters doing anything that is negative or not strong and independent, because that would mean we're not woke or feminist. Thanks so much, audiences. You guys are the best. Please don't watch the original Mulan. Mulan was shown as weak at the beginning, therefore it's not a feminist movie. Was any of the action good? I'm glad you asked, because holy God, it isn't. I mean, some of the choreography was actually kinda cool, but it's a little hard to tell what's going on when the editing is so choppy. Like, this is the final fight of the whole movie between Mulan and the main villain's henchmen, and I can barely tell what's happening. And what is happening doesn't really make any sense because the poor directing and nonsensical physics. This movie just has a sense of flatness and boringness to it, mixed in with some sheer infuriating madness. The music is all so much more flat and less cinematic than it was in the original. Like, the scene of Mulan's father accepting the scroll, and especially Mulan running away, don't have any weight or any sense of epicness to them. In the original, when Mulan gears up, she cuts her hair, runs away from home, it's so freaking epic with that awesome music playing. But in this one, we just see the family wake up the next day and see that she's gone. Like, come on, you didn't even try to replicate the original sequence? I get that I don't want these remakes to be a shot-for-shot remake, but if you're this bad, you better try to emulate the original. I guess what I'm trying to say is, this movie is bad. It is really bad. Did I like anything about it? I mean, some of the costumes were pretty cool. I really liked seeing the guy who played Hong from Warrior, I guess. That's an underrated show. You guys should go watch Warrior right now. I guess the side soldiers weren't terrible, though they were way better in the original. They weren't really memorable, but they had some funny moments. Like I said, some of the choreography was okay, even though it's kind of hard to tell what's going on because of the editing. Really, the acting from everyone except the girl who played Mulan was okay, but that's kind of sucky when your main character is flat. Honestly, I would have just come out of this movie bored and maybe mildly annoyed if it weren't for those bad messages, but because of those infuriating, borderline harmful messages, I came out of this movie mad beyond all comprehension. Seriously, those harmful messages brought this movie down from a 4, maybe even 4.5 out of 10, down to a 2 out of 10, which is as low as a movie can realistically go in my book. And you might all be thinking, the video's over, you're finished. No, we're not finished. Because somehow, some way, there was one movie that was even worse than this. I can't believe I'm about to say something positive about Mulan 2020. But here we go. Mulan 2020 is a bad movie. It has bad messages. That being said, you may disagree with me on this, but in my opinion, it isn't broken on a fundamental level. It is a bad movie, one of the worst I've ever seen. But on a basic level, I can still say that it functions as a feature film. And it especially functions as an adaptation. And no, I don't mean as an adaptation of the 1998 Disney Mulan movie, but of the original Mulan story. The oldest known piece of this story is called The Ballad of Mulan, known from the Northern Wei dynasty. And the song is short and simple. There isn't much detail at all about Mulan herself or her struggles. So, it wouldn't be absolutely breaking the moral or the spirit of the story to make her an ultra badass girl boss with chi powers, no weaknesses or no personality. It won't make for as good of a movie, or as good of an adaptation of the 1998 Disney Mulan, but it isn't a broken idea or concept. There is a difference between a bad movie and a broken movie. A broken movie can still be enjoyable, and a bad movie can still function as a film, or as an adaptation. Now, riddle me fucking this. Why on earth would you take a story so closely and fundamentally tied to a certain theme and message, and then proceed to adapt that story, but throw the message completely out the window? Not only is that absolutely disrespectful to the original story, but it is frustrating as sin to watch unfold and completely wastes the viewer's time. I am of course talking about Pinocchio. Why did you make this, Disney? Why does this exist? Why does Robert Zemeckis keep falling off lower and lower? This guy made Back to the Future, for God's sake. Now, I know this is probably a controversial opinion since I feel like most people think Mulan 2020 is worse. And you know what? I will say that Mulan is objectively worse than this movie. But Pinocchio pisses me off even more than Mulan did. Let me explain why. First, we'll start off with the only positives I have. Granted, there are more positives than Mulan, but it's the negatives that drag this one down lower for me. So here's what I didn't hate. Honest John and Gideon were pretty funny and entertaining. Their visuals weren't great, but I'll get into that later. But yeah, they gave me a few chuckles, except for the super out-of-place Chris Pine joke, which worked in a vacuum here, but will date this movie horribly. Plus, their physical comedy was decent too, I guess. It made me laugh. Joseph Gordon-Levitt had a few good lines and deliveries as Jiminy Cricket. I actually liked the character here. He was kinda funny. And I also just really like Joseph Gordon-Levitt. That's it. Those are all the positives. I know that it's better than the positives in Mulan, but let's get into why this one is the worst of all of these remakes on this list. Firstly, the goddamn visuals. Nothing in this movie is coherent. The day scenes were so obnoxiously bright, and the night scenes were so horribly dark that I could not see anything that was happening. On top of all of that, why do we have these ugly, clashing CGI abominations? Look at Figaro. Why did we need to CGI a goddamn cat? You use a real cat in Cinderella. Could we not have gotten a real cat and just enhance it with CGI? Instead, they morph a cartoon-accurate Figaro face onto these hyper-realistic cat textures and it looks like shit. Like, if this is how a more cartoon-accurate Lion King 2019 would have looked, I'm glad we got what we did, because I would rather look at boring lions than ugly ones. And then you have Honest John, who looks almost like a 100% realistic fox. He has some extra expression in the eyes, but it does not look anything like the cartoony visual style of Figaro. And then you have Gideon, who is the worst of both worlds. If Figaro was ugly, Gideon is legitimately uncanny. Like, he looks awful here. The visual language of these animals is so out of sync that it feels like these characters are all from different movies. Also, the fish was CGI too, but I guess it wasn't quite as bad, I don't know. And then you have Pinocchio himself. The CGI is super uncanny, but it's not just the design, it's the rendering. I have a hard time believing this character is here. It was passable for some of the movie, but in 90% he looks totally fake and out of the world, especially in the Blue Fairy scene, where it's so obvious that Pinocchio isn't actually here. Like, how did Pirates of the Caribbean manage to do this better 16 years earlier? This last bit is a mix of the story and visuals, which was the rising action and the climax. As a kid, one of my favorite parts of the original Pinocchio was Pinocchio sinking himself down to the ocean floor and walking around. Not only did it look cool, but it built genuine tension because all the sea creatures rushed away and hid at the mere mention of Monstro's name. It really builds anticipation for this monster whale, and definitely makes the scene a lot scarier. In this movie, Pinocchio doesn't sink to the floor, he just has a bird drag him along the way like he's wakeboarding. Like, this is so much lamer and makes even less sense in my eyes, but whatever, let's move on. Next up is Tom Hanks. How on earth do you cast one of the finest actors of our time and make him so boring here? I genuinely cannot tell if this is an acting or directing flaw, but Hanks was not it here. 6 minutes into the movie and he already changed his accent twice. Bro could not nail a solid voice down. Which is kinda weird considering how Hanks absolutely mastered his non-native accent in The Terminal. Underrated movie, by the way. And then there's the stupid puppet show girl, who added literally nothing to the movie. Like, she was legit so forgettable that I forgot about her inclusion in the movie until I was looking at my notes to write the script. She was that pointless. But okay. I've beat around the bush long enough. Now let's get into the main reason why this movie is ranked last. That is the handling of Pinocchio's character arc and the main message. So before we go over this, let's look at the original film really quick. Overall, it's a charming enough movie, but I don't really think that Pinocchio came across as a bad enough kid for the message to feel genuine. The whole point of Pinocchio itself, the story I mean, is that he must learn to be honest and selfless, specifically honest, because that is the main point of the story and his character arc. It is imperative that the story arc be executed perfectly, or at least well, in order for the rest of the movie to work. However, as a symbol and a device to portray this message, the original film didn't do the best. This is mainly because Pinocchio himself wasn't really a bad or dishonest protagonist who really needed to learn a lesson. He came across as a naive kid who was literally born yesterday and he's still learning how the world works. Most of the actions he makes in the movie don't seem malicious, mostly just naive or the victim of manipulation from Honest John and Gideon. Like in the original book, Pinocchio does some pretty naughty stuff, like accidentally killing Jiminy Cricket and selling his book to go watch a puppet show, after promising Geppetto he would go to school with the book. But movie Pinocchio really doesn't do anything even near that level of bad. Like, I was a little older when I saw this one for the first time, like 2nd or 3rd grade, so given how iconic the whole nose growing thing was, I assumed that he lied all the time and his nose growing was a major part of the film, given how iconic the gimmick is. But in the original movie, he only lies in a single scene. So really, the original Disney film wasn't a perfect adaptation of the Pinocchio story. It's still a decent enough movie, however. Now with that in mind, this remake was perfectly set up for success given the original's quality of telling the Pinocchio story and developing Pinocchio as a character. So this movie did that, right? Right? The absolute bastardization and assassination of Pinocchio's character here makes the original look like the Prince of Egypt or something, I don't know. So, if Pinocchio came across as a naive little kid in the original film, he comes across like an actual angelic saint in this one. Firstly, just like in the original movie, Pinocchio doesn't go with Gideon and Honest John because he actively wants to skip school and be bad, he's being manipulated. But it's even worse here, because in this one, Jiminy tricks John and Gideon into knocking themselves out, and then he convinces Pinocchio to continue to go to school. So Pinocchio does this. But the school kicks him out for being a puppet? Now where does that lead him? Oh, I know where it leads him. Right back into the manipulative hands of John and Gideon. But like, he did what he was supposed to do. He was told to go to school by Geppetto, then Jiminy tells him again after saving him from John and Gideon, and Pinocchio does it? So how exactly is this an issue of morality if he did what he was supposed to do? But what really sealed this movie's fate was the Pleasure Island sequence. Once again, let's look at the original's shortcomings. In the original, Pinocchio is actively trying to return home when once again he runs into John and Gideon. Then, John manipulates him in an admittedly really funny scene where he convinces Pinocchio that he's sick and needs to take a vacation to Pleasure Island to cure himself.
Now, that heart. Ooh. A palpitating syncopation of the dilladilla with a wicky-wacky stabbing of the Floyd joy.
Throughout the scene, Pinocchio is clearly uncomfortable and tries to tell them that he needs to go home, when John and Gideon pick him up and forcibly march him to the carriage to Pleasure Island against his will. This is not how a dishonest boy would act. He's clearly trying to get away from this and go home. This is not a good way to portray the character's dishonesty and immorality. But guess what? The remake makes it even worse. Oh god, it's so much worse. Pinocchio is just standing on the street corner as he's trying to go home when the carriage speeds by and picks him up. Like, if you thought the original was kidnapping, then you haven't seen nothing yet. Like, he literally had no opportunity to get off and run home safely. He was standing minding his own business, the carriage comes out of nowhere, grabs him, and pulls him away. And then we get to the crown jewel of this movie's awfulness, Pleasure Island itself. Like, in the original movie, they clearly show smoking and drinking as bad things that have bad consequences. By smoking and drinking, they turn into donkeys. Pinocchio even acknowledges this when he sees Lampwick turning into a donkey and he puts his beer down. This movie had clear and strong anti-smoking and anti-drinking messages. And this movie is part of the reason why I had no interest in smoking or drinking as a kid. These were good messages against substance abuse. These messages actually worked on me as a kid. It's a really good thing to have in your movie. Why the fuck are there no cigars or beer kegs?! This remake replaces all the alcohol and cigars with soda and candy. You know, things that normal kids eat and drink, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, it's not entirely good for you, but eating candy and drinking soda is just something that both kids and adults do, and there are no legal barriers against this. But not only this, by censoring Pleasure Island, this remake actually got rid of the anti-smoking and drinking messages. Like, can you believe that? An animated film from 1940 was more progressive than its live-action counterpart in 2022. This is legitimately awful. Like, I can almost understand why you may not want to portray child actors smoking and drinking, but it's for a good cause, so what's the harm? Schools show these anti-smoking and drinking seminars all the time. Just because you show something on screen does not mean you condone it. This should be abundantly clear when this story is about morality. If they show Pinocchio being bad, that doesn't mean the movie is condoning his bad behavior, because the point of the character is for Pinocchio to learn his fucking lesson! This is a travesty! The movie is showing kids that there are serious, dire, life-ending consequences of eating candy and drinking soda, something that many people do and is generally safe as long as it's not in excess. You might be thinking, that exact same sentiment applies to smoking and drinking, but keep in mind that smoking and drinking damage your body and brain far more than candy and soda. explaining why there are fucking laws surrounding them! On top of that, this version of Pleasure Island is also further damaging to Pinocchio's character, because it shows him being absolutely appalled by Pleasure Island. In the original, he was shown having a great time, indulging in all the activities, smoking, drinking, which is the point of the story. He needs to be doing bad things. But in the remake, he looks terrified by Pleasure Island, and he does nothing except take a single swig of root beer. Does this sound like a bad kid who needs to learn a lesson? Because to me, this comes across as a kid whose lesson has already been learned. And on top of all this, Pinocchio still grows the donkey ears and tail, even though he was clearly uncomfortable with Pleasure Island and didn't want to be there. All he took was one swig of root beer, and that was enough for him to grow donkey parts. This movie is basically saying, you see, kids, even if you barely indulge in bad behaviors, or if you don't indulge them at all, you will still be punished for being near them, even if you are near them against your will. Like, what?! Why did he have to grow the ears and tails for this? Granted, they go away a lot sooner here, but it still doesn't make up for the fact that Pinocchio did not deserve this at all. Like, seriously, the movie is too afraid to show Pinocchio doing anything bad, yet they still punish him. They keep the punishment, but cut out all the bad stuff. You know why? Because God forbid we have the main character in a Disney movie doing anything immoral! Even though the point of Pinocchio is that he does bad things and needs to learn his lesson! And in case you're wondering, yes, they censor the jackass scene. I just find it hilarious that they censor this for little kids, but they have no problems with little kids watching Marvel movies with swear words all the time.
Now what? Open the fucking door!
And don't even start me with a climax. Like I said earlier, having Pinocchio not going underwater was lame. But I also didn't bring up earlier that Monstro had no build-up in this movie. Like, he was mentioned by name once, but no one seemed that concerned over it. There was no build-up and no suspense. In the original, they built that suspense way the fuck up, and I was genuinely scared of Monstro as a little kid because of this. In this version, you would be forgiven if you forgot that he exists. And then boom! He jumps out of nowhere and swallows Pinocchio and Geppetto. They traded the genuine tension and fear for a quick gag of Geppetto being cut off mid-sentence when Monstro eats him. And it's actually kind of hilarious how no one seems fazed by the fact they just got eaten by a giant sea monster. Jiminy seems annoyed at worst. Pinocchio has practically no reaction. I'm sorry, it's so stupid. And this isn't even part of the script. And Geppetto seems low-key excited to start his new life inside Monstro. His exact word. I'm sorry. I'm not even trying to laugh. Like, I can't help it. His exact words are, "It is a bit strange to be inside the belly of a whale, but we will make do." God. Like, huh? Isn't the main point of having your main characters get eaten by a monster to make your audience uneasy and fearful of their safety? Wait a second. Isn't that the point of any climax? And then they escape Monstro and Geppetto fucking dies. I kinda wish he stayed dead, but whatever. All kids' movies have fake out deaths. You know what else? The movie ends on a very vague, kinda ambiguous note by not explicitly saying or showing that Pinocchio became a real boy. So, you're telling me that after an entire movie of our protagonist doing next to nothing wrong, and being as kind-hearted and as honest as they come, he still doesn't get his reward in the end? That's it? This movie was bad enough, but I would have at least felt a small fraction of satisfaction if Pinocchio became a real boy in the end, because even though he was never very bad to begin with, he would have earned it by being as kind and as honest as he was throughout the entire film. But by not showing or explicitly saying that Pinocchio got the fate he was working towards the entire movie, that is literally one of the most unsatisfying endings to a movie I have ever seen, ever. That's it, I'm done talking about why I hate this movie. I cannot recommend this to literally anyone in any scenario. It's not even funny bad, it's frustratingly bad. You will not have a fun time with this movie, ironically. You will not have a good time with this movie no matter how you watch it. Do not watch it ever, ever, ever. I'm not even going to give this movie a 0 or even 1 out of 10 because it doesn't deserve to go down as the only movie on this list with that low quality. It does not deserve anything noteworthy or special. So I'm just going to give this movie the 2 out of 10 it probably objectively deserves and attempt to go the rest of my life without thinking of this movie ever again. But I know that's impossible because the emotional turmoil and the scars the movie left me will stay with me forever. I will die thinking about this shitty CGI Pinocchio and his stupid, poorly written, poorly thought out, genuinely worthless movie. 2 out of 10. I'm fucking done. Okay, this video was really long, so I'm just gonna keep this brief. Though I had fun making this, it was not worth sitting through all these movies to get here. But if you made it to the end, thank you. If you happen to disagree with anything I said, please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Also, be sure to drop a like. I like likes. Thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe.